Wasabi guys, I wanted to make this more of a discussion video, nothing super serious, but it's something that I feel like needs to be said because we are experiencing a lot of changes in the Commander format. We're starting to see a lot more competitive players. As there's more players entering the format, that's typically going to happen. Popularity is going to increase. This is going to make it harder for a lot of casual players to enjoy the game in the same way, which is kind of a sad thing because Commander is inherently casual. It wasn't intended to be super competitive, but as we can see with Dominaria, this is probably going to lead to a whole new wave of Commander players entering the format. Hopefully it remains casual for the most part, but it's inevitable that we have standard players that want to bring some of that competitive nature to Commander, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I like competitive EDH, but at its core, I think this game is at its best when players are just trying to have fun. You can also try to win, but a lot of the fun of Commander is seeing how long the game can go, what interactions you can come up with in a singleton format, and a lot of that fun comes from Group Hug, which is a deck type that I think a lot of new players maybe don't appreciate, because I've experienced this multiple times, either on the receiving end or just watching it, and it is quite painful, very cringeworthy to see the player at the table who is actually just playing innocent Group Hug, or at least their deck isn't the most threatening Group Hug deck, and they get hated out of the game for whatever reason. And it's usually because players who are unaware of the deck type, Group Hug, or just new players in general who are unaware of the Commander format and all of the different deck types that exist, which I can understand. You don't usually have these deck types in other formats. Group Hug isn't a thing in 1v1 for obvious reasons, so I can understand why someone would go and attack a Kineos and Tyro deck if they have no idea what that deck does. While there are certain variants of these Group Hug decks that can be at times deadly, for the most part, these decks are nowhere near competitive compared to other Commander decks, especially ones like Atraxa. If you were to look at Edgar Markov even, a lot of decks based off of the more recent Commander options from Commander sets are way more competitive and capable of putting pressure on your opponents and just being a threat than these Group Hug decks are. So if there's anything that I want you guys to take away from this video, it's that Group Hug is important for the identity of the format. I don't think people realize this, but in most 4-player games, which is what multiplayer Commander ends up being most of the time, when you have nothing but players who just play combo, the games don't seem to be as interesting. When you don't have someone there who is going to control the game, who is going to kind of play mediator, the games become less interesting. If you've ever played a game where it's just 4 combo players who have very little to no control in their decks, it is one of the most miserable playing experiences ever because the games don't last long and it just becomes who can combo off the quickest and who can win the quickest. And the unfortunate part about this is that a lot of these combo players maybe don't appreciate the fact that control makes the game more interesting, so they end up going after the control deck or the Group Hug deck, which I'm calling Group Hug control because most of the time in Group Hug decks, that's what you have to do to stay alive is control the game, board wipe a few times. Picking on the player who is honestly the least capable of knocking you out of the game seems very cheap. And I think this needs to be addressed. While I agree you're eventually going to have to beat that player, and most Group Hug decks aren't meant to be the most competitive or capable of winning games, but hating on them versus hating on other players is just ruining the format, honestly. If you were to ask a lot of people what's wrong with this format, if there's anything wrong with it, a lot of people would say the super aggressive combo decks. Some people think that's a huge upside, that you can play a lot of cool cards and combo with very unique strategies in a singleton format. But if you were to ask them, does that make the playing experience better when people can combo off earlier than turn 4, they would probably say that they appreciate the fact that Commander is a game that can last a long time. And yeah, some people don't like the fact that this format you can have games that last for hours. I'm not saying hours, I'm saying maybe 2 hours max for a good quality experience, and that is honestly what Commander is about. You're playing with 100 card decks, for crying out loud. So learn to appreciate the interactions, learn to appreciate the politics of the game, as opposed to just trying to win as soon as possible. Because there is value in helping your opponents out. There is value in interacting with other players. So give Group Hug a chance. Don't just bully them out of the game. I've pretty much said my piece here. As always, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.